I hope you guys see my screen now. Just a second.
Yeah, we can.
Press over here. Cool. So everyone sees quantum creativity on the screen, hopefully. Yeah, welcome to the session. We had a bit of an issue with Zoom jumping in, so I'm still kind of organizing myself. The title of the session is Quantum Creativity, and it's a term I invented. It came up in a discussion, and yeah. Well, the basics of it is basically that I think it's either ingenious or utterly ridiculous, a word pair. I haven't really decided upon it yet, but the idea here is to test out a couple of ideas of what it could be, and through basically the same conceptual approach, also think about like what the kind of the changed perspective to creative work in the post-COVID world is, which is pretty big as a subject. But then at the same time, I think we can kind of find nice kind of angles to real life and applications to real life of basically bringing together the concepts of quantum and creativity. And what I'm actually looking for here is kind of looking at creativity in today's world and in creative and design agencies, and how the principles are kind of wired towards not really coming up with one thing, but actually coming up with shapeshifters and kind of growing fluid. And in that sense, there's something inherently modern about both the idea of quantum and creativity. And at the same time, I have to say that it's also fully speculative in terms of quantum and quantum computing and quantum mechanics and things like this. Things in the quantum world is something that the actual scientists are still figuring out. So you can't really say anything too concrete about it. So I decided to play with the idea. Going into the details, so obviously TGT, or Think Good Thought, started from the impact of COVID and the Corona situation hitting everyone, and I think that it's a really nice initiative from Lily and everyone at Mirum to start kind of gathering the creative thinking and thinkers and doers and creators and artists and business thinkers and everyone to sort of figure out, so where are we at the moment, and which direction should we be going, and what are the implications of this situation. But then at the same time, I started realizing that it's also been now roughly about 3 months since Corona hit. So it's been basically 3 months of mulling over the fact that the world is changing. Nothing is like it used to be, and new ways of working, and all of these grand concepts coming into existence and changing the way we live and work in the creative field. And it's now, hold on, I think it's the 16th of June. So roughly about exactly 3 months after the COVID situation hit us. From the special circumstances, crisis situations, and the world of uncertainty. And I decided to play with the concept. So not necessarily go directly into COVID world, but be inspired by it and take a pretty creative approach to it, explore creativity through it. So a concept that we've all learned, at least in Finland, throughout the COVID era, or in a couple of weeks, we became familiarized with the idea of scenarios. So so when the shock hit us in 3 months ago, we went overnight from thinking about, okay, this is a shock, into actually formulating actual scenarios for how to tackle it, all the way to the Finnish government and our decision makers. So all of a sudden, our news were flocked with this idea of scenarios. So we have scenario A, all out mayhem, scenario B, a long stalemate, and scenario C, which was twins. So what you see on your screens. And all of a sudden, I think, at least, these are concepts that a lot of people in business and especially in design thinking have been thinking for a long time. And especially if you think about future research and futurists, obviously there's this idea that there is no one future, but there's actually multiple futures that we constantly shape and choose from, and we can kind of explore and then make decisions based on it. So design our path in a way. But then all of a sudden, 3 months ago, it becomes part of the public debate. Okay, which is the best scenario, or which scenario do we choose? Which scenario do other economic areas or countries choose for the COVID situation? And I think there's actually two really fundamental ideas that were introduced at the same time. The other one is scenario, so possible futures, and thinking about it. And I know that being in the leadership of our company, we also jumped quickly on board and kind of started thinking about possible scenarios, and also economic publications from Kauppalehti to Helsingin Sanomat, for example, started thinking about what are the scenarios for what are the most probable scenarios for us to get over this situation. But then there was another powerful concept, which was basically the freedom and also the incentive to consciously consciously rethink everything. So basically, there's all of a sudden we have this situation where we can kind of reassess our relationship with the world and actually recreate it. And when you put these together, obviously this is not like this has existed before. But then when you put these things together, it starts kind of capturing the public imagination of how we should and how we could approach the future. And I think what's interesting is that before we hit the beginning of April, a lot of Finns had never even thought about scenarios, or maybe yes, unconsciously, but then we start formulating our direction through possibilities. And even the Prime Minister starts talking about possible futures. And the cool thing is that all of this stuff that's in design theory and deep in design thinking, and also speculative design as well, all of these ideas all of a sudden come to life and start forming how we tackle the future. Okay, but I have an agenda, so which is quantum creativity. And before jumping over to the actual agenda and defining what quantum creativity is, that's the first sort of a concept that I wanted to establish, which was basically scenarios and this idea of thinking about futures as a fluid thing. But then my thesis, or the name of my presentation, includes quantum on one side. And I wanted to sort of open up a couple of key concepts in quantum theory that I very loosely, very free-handedly, and very associatively we'll use in this session for defining what quantum creativity is. So first off, I don't know how much you guys know about quantum creativity or quantum theory. I'm really generalistic about it. I've been reading about it, but there are some super interesting concepts that kind of open the world in a very different light. And one of them is qubit. So if in traditional computing, what we're looking at is basically decisions between 0 and 1, or I and O. So basically you have a switch that goes on and off, black and white, and so forth. And then all of the information in the digital world that surrounds us and drives us is built on this idea of packing information in a series of bits. So 0101, 000, 111, and so forth. And then all of a sudden you can pack all of this stuff into computers and try to figure out the most complex questions of the world, or bring things like platform economy into existence and things like this. So it's a really fundamental change of perspective in how humans have approached how humans have basically approached life for the past 50 years or so, 50 plus years or so. But when we go into qubit and quantum theory, so we're basically going inside atoms, and all sorts of weird stuff starts happening, and phenomenon that doesn't really exist in IRL, in real life, comes out. But with qubits, we're basically looking at a shapeshifter, this kind of a computing unit of fluctuating states between 1 and 0. And this is one of the representations that someone has made out of it. But the way I've been told and understood it in the best possible or easiest possible way is thinking of a gradient ball, where North Pole is 1 and South Pole is 0. And then there's a gradient all around the ball. And you can do, basically at each step, you can kind of have a computing choice. So a round surface capable of holding almost indefinite number of versions and kind of simultaneous computing possibilities, which is pretty trippy. If you think about 1 and 0, that's pretty close to our life. So basically, do I choose this or do I choose this? And then when you start thinking about it, it's kind of interesting that this black and white world of choices becomes actually a gradient and these gray shades. And then you can kind of compute with different gray shades, and there's this a degree of multiplicity that comes in. And obviously this is fully speculative. So the biggest companies in the world are trying to build these machines at the moment. So you have IBM and Google and Facebook trying to crack how to do it. And at the moment you have to either be at 0.12 kelvins or something like this, so super cold, or then the actual computing state only lasts for a flash. But the promise of the thinking is kind of interesting. And then if you think of this generalistically, you can also think of it in a sense that in our common vernacular, in the way that we approach life, we often talk about life is not black and white. And people know that there's no right and wrong. There's only decisions and kind of shades to it. And I think the quantum world sort of exposes that as well. So it basically presents the world as a gradient of possibilities. And this, from the creative perspective, is actually pretty interesting. Like if you start thinking about it, it actually promises that deep in the almost like philosophical layers of the universe, everything has multiple possibilities, and there's infinite number of ways to approach it instead of just two. And then you can go fully philosophic on how the bit world basically puts us to this like kind of black and white decision making thing, and packs information in limited quantities. And then you also get Moore's law, for example, which is that you can pack more and more computing power in a smaller place, which quantum computing basically then reverts or basically trashes. And then at the same time, we also realize at the moment that Moore's law is stalling down. So the exponential growth of computing power in bit-based computers is stalling down. So the promise with this kind of faded world is pretty big for computer sciences as well, and science at large. But then so the quantum world is filled with these like mind-boggleries, which basically is this, when you start thinking about it, it's this kind of a flowing world of possibilities. There's another fundamental phenomenon in the quantum world that I find super interesting, which is superposition. And superposition is basically, the scientists have realized that among other qualities, the same particle in the qubit level can also exist in two places at the same time, which is a mind-bogglery. Basically explodes everything, and the laws of physics, as we know, is kind of not reverted, but has a completely different approach to laws of physics on the deep level. But then when you think about superposition, and so the same particle being in two places, existing in two places at the same time, that's pretty close to kind of this idea of parallel possibilities, parallel universes, and parallel versions of the same thing. And again, I'm being fully associative and taking liberties in thinking about this on freehand. So basically the quantum world promises that there's infinite possibilities, and also the same thing can be kind of multiple things at the same time. And that's a pretty powerful idea. So combining this quantum thinking, so the two sides of things, like the shading possibilities and shading computing possibilities, and all the shades of gray, with these kind of multiple possibilities being possible at the same time. What we're looking for is basically a world of opportunities, a fluid world of not really setting something a clear definition for something, but more finding a framework for playing with concepts and playing with creativity. Now, before that, so the title of the whole session is Quantum Creativity. So I wanted to go through also looking at what creativity means, and what kind of options we have for interpreting creativity, because a lot of people have a different, very different kind of approach to what creativity means. So a couple of kind of basics of creativity and how we can take a look at that in terms of what quantum creativity means. So one sort of realization with the concept of creativity is that it's basically a product of the 20th century. So before the beginning of 20th century, or turn of the 20th century, so 1900s, there was no concept called creativity, or the concept was unknown to mankind. So before that, creativity and creation were basically somehow divine, or then blurred in this ideological question creation being natural, or the natural world, and then kind of a formation of human thought. And then little by little, we started getting into the thinking that human beings can actually be kind of creative agents, and we can kind of come up in different ways, come up with new concepts. And I won't go too deep into what predated the 20th century, but obviously, like if you look at it in the especially highlighted in the 1950s and from 40s on, like post-war, we started getting a creative industry where the idea is to commercially kind of utilize creative thought and coming up with new kinds of approaches to presenting products and companies to the world in a new way, in creating something new. What we're basically looking at is this. So currently we're in this kind of exponential world of creativity where everything from World Economic Forum to business thinkers are basically highlighting creativity and creative thought and creative possibilities of creative thinking as one of the biggest kind of human feats that prepares us for the future. And obviously, this is due to computing power coming into replace human beings in kind of computational work. So basically, kind of repetitive things that you can easily kind of calculate faster and more efficiently with computers. And it becomes clearer and clearer that the human role becomes an agent of fluid thinking, agent of coming up with new concepts and actually guiding the process of innovation and creating new things, and also finding new ways of presenting ideas to other human beings. So very much we're in this kind of exponential phase of creativity, where the importance of free thinking, the importance of associative and innovative kind of bringing together fresh ideas and creating kind of well-being and all of these kind of world-opening concepts is highlighted in how we are humans. But if we go to the very basics of what creativity basically is I went to Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary that describes it in a nutshell as the use of imagination or original ideas to create something, so inventiveness. So imagination and originality in formulating something are the kind of the basics of dictionary definition of creativity. Then in the design and creative industries, we're actively engaging in creative problem solving. So especially from the design perspective, creativity becomes problem solving. So defining a problem, then using the unbound thinking to come up with solutions for it. And highlighted in the lower part of the slide, the design thinking kind of a framework of convergent and divergent thinking, as in the process of discover, define, develop, deliver. That this basically kind of structures the thinking to when do you kind of explore the world and when do you try to kind of define it, and then creatively use creativity in solving problems. And obviously this is kind of an approach that's taking over, or that has been expanding from purely kind of product design world and design thinking in designing products and into designing services. But nowadays the realms go from tackling the biggest questions of our time to designing businesses to taking, for example, legal design as an example, to taking kind of rigid processes as law and tackling them through creative problem solving. Paul Arden, in a kind of a handbook of advertising creativity, it's not how good you are and so forth, summed it up as a client saying, I want the same as my competitors, but different. So creativity is thinking about exactly the ticks all the boxes, but then it's slightly different, so that it doesn't frighten, but it gives the person or the company what it needs. And I think that this is kind of the other side of creativity, that in the creative and design industries, traditionally, and especially from the ad agency side, what we're basically looking at is finding a creative way of putting something that already exists. And now, in the current situation, I think more and more we have to find kind of new ways of opening worlds to people and being more interactive and kind of inclusive with including everyone in the process of creativity. Now, Saku Tuominen, a Finnish thinker, has on the other hand, kind of crystallized everything as halu tehdä eri tavalla, paremmin. So the willingness or want to do everything differently in a better way. And I think there's something cool over here that it's actually conscious formulating. There's an idea of differentiation in it, and the idea that we're actually shooting for a better future. And at SEC, where I currently work as a creative director, we were mulling over our purpose about a year and a half ago, and we ended up summarizing everything up in unleash imagination to craft better futures. And the idea is built in that it's all about imagination, using your imagination to come up with something, consciously formulating something, and then also crafting that you have an active role in it, and also a conscious role in defining what the futures are and what decisions do we make. Then in lateral thinking in the 1960s, there's this powerful idea of creativity as reimagining information in new contexts, and this is pretty much what I'm grappling on with quantum creativity. So basically taking quantum and putting in new context and seeing if it flies. And then in 1990, there's this book called 32 Traits of Creative People by Raymond Black, which has 32 traits that make you creative. So there's this just to say that there's tons of different things that kind of come into play when we're thinking about creativity. And obviously we can kind of take different aspects of it. So creativity can be a lot of things as well. What I would like to kind of summarize all of this to, it can be cognitive flexibility, new unexpected connections, willingness to engage in play, even with the biggest questions, flashes of intuition, trust in them, and seeing what flies. Possibilities disposition. So this basically means that you're oriented towards possibilities. Love of onlyness, love for onlyness, and aesthetics of everything. So bringing all of these things together, we basically have this world of shaded possibilities, multiple possibilities, and another world of possibilities, multiple different things aimed at creating something new. So bringing these two concepts together was my concept for this session. And as it says on the slide, let's play. True to the current idea of, or like the modern idea of scenarios, I have kind of three scenarios, three propositions, three approaches to what quantum creativity based on these things could be. And scenario one, notes over here, so I'll open my computer, my phone at the same time. So basically tackling from the everyday creative work, and kind of taking the problem solving side, and then the creative design industries, and then how can you come up with creative solutions that last time and complexity in today's world. The proposition is that quantum creativity means better creative work through multiplicity. So in the current world, everything is moving towards personalized. Obviously, we have a lot more data, and we can kind of tie that data into how people act. And there's a big with technology, there's this big promise of personalization. So everything becomes more relevant with personalization. So thus we're actually making more kind of meaningful things when it becomes more and more personalized. But at the same time, we have a more and more complex world where the environments we live in are splintering. So this becomes a really a challenge for brands and companies, and even human beings, of navigating through this more and more complex, splintered and fragmented world around it. Now, how do you counter this? So when you think about it from the company's perspective, companies need a device to ensure alignment. What basically companies and brands are looking for is a direct, clear direction for where they are going, in a way that the interaction with people is as clear as possible, as coherent as possible, and as systematic as possible. And I think that at our work, for example, this is where we're kind of what we're working with. We're trying to come up with brands that have a clear concept that lasts time and builds a coherent image, and thus it provides alignment to all of the sides of the company working together to create that experience. So when you look at the question from the kind of the company side, is that you have all of these kind of traditionally thought silos, but more than just silos, you have multiple different environments where you actually exist. So from brand and marketing, obviously, to the modern thinking of CX and customer experience, and kind of combining brand experience and customer experience. Then you have your offering, figuring out what your services and products are. You have your R&D and development and innovation. Then you have your service interactions and interactions with people, both internally and with clients. And then you have your culture. So the idea becomes what is the way to align all of this to actually go towards a really impactful direction. And what I see in exploring what quantum creativity could mean is that a concept of brand concept that doesn't really in the traditional sense exist in kind of formulating strategies and formulating campaigns. So the winning brands and winning companies have been able to formulate their work in a really kind of world-opening creative concept that sort of arches over all of these themes that we had on the previous slide. What I like to think about it is that it's a creative brief at large. It basically gives direction for everyone to be creative in. It gives an openness and purpose and direction to everything, so that it creates a seamless, strong experience. But then at the same time, it also facilitates and allows people to be free. Multiplicity. So it's not just one thing, but it's actually multiple different things working towards the same direction. So basically what we're looking at is a concept in a way to facilitate multiplicity and counter the uncertainty and evolving environments. And I think there's something powerful in the simplicity of this framework. Instead of tackling one thing and one kind of period in time, what you're actually doing is creating a living thing, an organic thing that can live and develop throughout time. And a key takeaway maybe from this, from the companies and brands point of view, is to kind of go from doing different things, concentrating on different things at different sites, but also concentrating in crystallizing and designing your company and brand as a framework that enables new connections. And the idea here is to facilitate and enable everyone to sort of tap to their creativity in the best way possible. So then, what comes out of it is basically a world of ambient narrative. So if the company, for example, has multiple different niche audiences that it wants to talk to, or not even niche audiences, but multiple audiences, and you start getting this matrix of wanting to meet them in different places, and then also the narrative to evolve in different places, not just have the same things. What we're basically going for is these ambient narratives next to a big narrative that tells a story. We also need existence and presence in multiple different places. And again, this becomes a really complex thing to create, so that it goes towards the same direction, and thus the framework is a really important kind of a device for this as well. And everything kind of sums up 2020 into creating different sides of experience. If we're looking at exploring the concept of experience, it's ultimately a really human-centric point of view. So basically, what we're looking at is me as a human being experiencing different sides in different environments, in different ways, and in different life situations. And the closer we get to this, well, the promise is that the better experience, but I think that just a coherent experience is enough as well. But being kind of experience-minded opens up to basically thinking of the world as a complex living thing, like the gradients over here, and then forming complex living things for these complex environments. So in a sense, thinking about creativity not just as ideas that become something and become one thing and last for a period of time, but then also as a kind of fluid, organic world, an evolving and changing world where things are designed to change and evolve with it. So that's pretty much my first proposal for what quantum creativity could mean. Second scenario, which I think actually develops from the first scenario, and I've summed it up as the age of wildly imaginative shapeshifters. When you think about all the complexity in the environments and in the world, one thing that has facilitated the complexity and that's kind of built into it is the digital world and the world of the possibilities of the digital world. So shaping new kinds of ways of interaction is one part of it, but then when you look at the full stack of the internet, for example, and on different levels, the possibilities built into it, and the rise of, for example, new imaginative concepts in formulating business and interaction between large groups of people, it becomes a world of shapeshifters. So a business model is no longer just one thing and offering something along the straight lines, but more kind of tapping to the different needs identified by data and identified in interaction with the actual users. So in figuring out what quantum creativity could mean, obviously thinking about it from the quantum perspective is tapping to the power of computing and milking the power of computing. So what if we put in all of these kind of shape-shifting powers of creating one thing, but then that it evolves with different environments, different people, and different needs. What we're basically looking at is continuous feedback loops and learning systems. And I just had recently a really cool discussion with Dagmar Radley's Chief Operating Officer. And we were talking about the possibilities of machine learning for creativity. And all of a sudden a new world arises where really in a tangible way, the creative process is more like giving a direction for the algorithms to work on, and then coming up with something wildly creative that opens new perspectives to the world, and not so much as formulating the actual end product. And then at the same time, this is the world depicted in the design process with scenarios and rapid testing and indefinite development. So basically, creating for a state of flux, in a sense. And in the first TGT session, I think Sami Niemelä had a really powerful way of presenting this in kind of presenting the idea that the era of the ready is over. So what we're basically creating at the moment is more and more meaningful living things, and closer to kind of tackling different things with one chosen direction, which I think is pretty interesting, and it's also a mind-blowing, mind twister, which is kind of fascinating to work with. So what we're basically essentially doing is imagining and creating living things instead of multiple static things trying to get to the same thing. And my background is in music, and recently I've been exploring the possibilities of generative music production software, for example. And the idea on that side is also pretty much the same thing, that you have an application, or you have a VST plugin that basically does indefinite number of versions for you, and then the call for playing with these options is where I think that the creativity and the kind of human conscious direction and designing the process towards a certain direction comes in. And then there's a power to ambience as well. And a concrete example again of kind of approaching this direction is that our work at SEC, we just recently launched a new kind of video department, or what used to be video department is nowadays called motion. And I think there's something fundamental about the world of motion, 3D animations that you're actually building not a single illustration or a series of illustrations, but you're actually creating a living world, and then creating brand visuality, for example, from this living world. And then this ties really well with the idea of experience. So it becomes also ambience. It becomes a feeling that comes through in everything, instead of telling a 30-second or a minute narrative where you tell a story with the classic story timeline or story structure. Storytelling also becomes this ambient storytelling, where everything is related, and the whole story becomes about tapping to the power of moments, and then also invoking a feeling in different experience in different environments, and owning that experience. I have a proposal for quantum creativity from this point of view. So scenario 2 proposal is learn the strategies and tactics of a world continuously in motion. So whatever creative field you are, or we are. Whatever creative profession, or from the client perspective as well, whatever creative entity you're trying to create with your brand or company, aim for a way of understanding and creating a multiplicity, enabling it to be ambient at the same time as it tells like lasting, big, world-changing stories. And the idea here is, with more and more splintered little fragmented places, what you're actually looking for also is kind of the overall momentum. So an exponential boost, like we saw in the beginning of it. We're on an exponential curve of creativity. Let's embrace that. Let's figure out what it will be, and keep certain options open as long as possible. So that was my other sort of approach for quantum creativity. I have a third one as well, which again is kind of related to that, but going into, if it's not being on a philosophical level yet, and playful philosophical level yet, this one goes into that world of what if. So I've titled this as Growing Fluid to Counter Complexity. And essentially what we're doing is, to package everything up, is kind of unlearning or relearning from a very strict system of second industrial revolution, of creating something on a line that produces something in the end. But if we ditch the whole process of that we have to make something ready, launch it to the world, and then that's it, and see what happens. If we embrace the fact that it's a continuous process, I think us as creatives, we need to start thinking about growing fluid to counter the complexity that comes with it. And it's a really super interesting challenge. So introducing the flexibility of ideas. How can an idea be a direction for a train of thought? How can it be almost an ideological structure that guides things towards the same direction? How can an idea be rethought again and again and again? How can an idea become a fluid thing that actually evolves over time and that keeps engaging people? How can it be also engaging in terms of bringing all the people in and letting them decide what the idea is? These are kind of the directions that I'm going for with the last quantum creativity definition. The core idea here is embrace multiple possibilities. So my idea can be multiple different things for multiple different people and multiple different environments. Why not create all of them? Why not try to find synergy and define a fluid way of seeing this? And there's a really powerful idea in the very core. I won't go too deeply into it, but OP's Timo Ritakallio has taken this same idea into the world of strategy as well, where he and Timo Vuori in Living Strategy, they define strategy as Päättymätön peli, so an endless game, where going from a strategic period where you have, like, for example, one year and you plan everything and execute and see what happens and see how well people catch on to it. You're actually building an endless game where you're constantly refining it and constantly taking in data and influences from around and creating these shapeshifters and living things for this environment. And so from the strategic point of view, this is also a matter of systems thinking. So basically looking at the larger picture and seeing what different forms the same thing could take. And tapping to the creativity side, then this means that creativity is, or we could turn creativity into an endless play, what if our concepts that we come up with are actually devices for endless play? What if we create marketing concepts that actually evolve over time and that keep engaging people in different ways, that are more or less things that evolve over time and become something else with the influences and the impact of the surrounding world. So that was my third option for what quantum creativity is. So the first one was basically facilitating a clear direction for what you're doing, and then shooting for a clear direction that's well directed. The second one was basically unleashing the computing power, and maybe also preparing for all of the possibilities of the coming quantum age when IBM and Google and Facebook finally crack their computers. What kind of problems are we solving with these new quantum computers, and what kind of ways are we using, and what are we innovating with all that computing power? So that was like quantum creativity from the computational side. And then number three is basically creating living play areas for creativity and thinking as possibilities. So that's it, folks. I haven't really decided upon it yet. We have a chat in the TGT session in Zoom. I think if you have an idea of whether it's 1, 2, or 3 is the definition of quantum creativity, shoot your ideas at me. Or then if you agree with me that it's actually 1 + 2 + 3 and a world of possibilities undefined, and let's explore it. I think you can also raise a thumb, do like this, go yay, or come up with new definitions for quantum creativity. I don't know. Thanks for today's session. I'm staying on the lines for a second and open for discussion with you guys as well.
Thank you a lot.